am I doing? Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for making the trip and joining us today for another, which has proved to be another compelling session at the Institute for Contemporary Affairs. I'm Dan Diker, and our president, Dr. Dory Gold, Director General Chaim Berskowitz are here. We all welcome you back to the Jerusalem Center. We just after the Mumbai massacres, the recent massacres, we thought it'd be very, very important to have a session with one of Israel's leading authorities on international terrorism, because there clearly are overlaps between what is happening in the global jihad with what is happening closer to home in the region, and even within the region closer to home, meaning the borders of Israel, in the neighborhood, the immediate neighborhood. So we right away called Colonel Yoni Fiegel and asked him if he would come and join us and shed some light, create some context and perspective on how we might understand the Mumbai massacres in context, not only there, not only in the subcontinent, but also here in closer to home. Colonel Fiegel is a senior research scholar at the International Institute for Counterterrorism, the ICT, in Herzliya, and he's also a member of the International Academic Counterterrorism Community. He serves as a consultant and a witness in trials against Hamas in the United States. He's a widely sought-out expert on international terror. You might have seen him on Fox, CNN, some of the international networks. What's interesting also about Colonel Fiegel's background is that he has a lot of direct professional experience in Judea and Samaria as well, having been a commander in the West Bank in various posts in the 1990s. So that he has this sort of on-the-ground local perspective, and then clearly professionally he also steps back and takes a strategic view of things, so that the balance between those two is rather fascinating, and I think should help us all understand these interconnections a little bit more clearly today. So with that, Yoni, would you come and share your thoughts with us, and we'll have a robust question and answer session.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dory, for inviting me, Dan. It's an honor and a pleasure to come among friends and share some views in this highly respected institution. And when the Mumbai attack started, first of all, instinctively, I started to analyze it, because this is the bread and butter that we are dealing with, trying to figure out who is who and what is happening there regarding the attack, analyzing the attack. Now, from the first phase, for me it was pretty clear that this attack was organized by a kind of an organization which maintains a strategic capability, which is much more than a lone wolf or a spontaneous, even suicide attack. It became very clear that this is at least a sponsored state terrorism, or even more directed by an organization that has an infrastructure within a kind of a safe haven. Cannot be otherwise. By analyzing the attack, it struck me, although it's totally two different arenas, it struck me the similarity to the Savoy attack in '75. Although it is two completely different cases, but we had an organization which was outside the borders of Israel, meaning in a safe haven or an ungoverned zone. It was in Lebanon, a Palestinian organization, and infrastructure. The highly skilled training, which took months, the preparations, the high level of intelligence, the naval phase. We're speaking about a huge operation. And I was very much involved in analyzing, and I was involved also in my operational history in those naval attacks, understanding and analyzing them. And at the end, the discourse of several cells assault cells, groups, very dedicated, well equipped with information and targeting highly valued targets. Now, a lot has been said about the Mumbai attack, and I don't think in this regard I can add any operational insight. To start with, before I go into the Middle East, I have a very profound question which I don't have an answer, and I wish to share it with you. Maybe you have some thoughts when we'll discuss it afterwards. And this is the simple question, why the Mumbai attack was not a suicide attack, what we call a conventional, which is not conventional, whereas we know that since 1998, Al-Qaeda hallmark in assaults was basically and usually suicide attacks. Not a sporadic shooting like in Luxor in 92, I think, by jihadists in Egypt. Al-Qaeda hallmark is suicide attack. With the whole rationale, the jihad, the sacrifice, the martyrdom, the purity to evoke fear, to all the consequences of the benefits from a suicide attack. Why those people did not press a button? Why the organization invested so much in preparation? A lot of logistics, a lot of money, while it would be much more easier, cheaper to recruit some homegrown, not even crossing border terrorists, equip them and send them. Is it a new strategy? Is it a different strategy, which is of course a different, but why? I'm not in a position to give answers, but I think that the international community has to take this attack into account regarding questions that have to be asked. Does it symbolize a new trend? Whether it is applicable to be manifested in Europe or in the US, much more highly motivated, maybe, highly trained, where, how, funding, all the infrastructure. It's unresembled to the 7/7 in London or in Madrid or other places that we've witnessed Al-Qaeda style, even if they were local organizations, where I'm sure that we understand that Al-Qaeda is a brand, we call it global jihad. Global and local, the ideas, the funding, the methodologies, and based on local infrastructure. And this is a question which I think deserves some answers, and I'm not sure that I have the answers, but maybe we can pick up collectively our minds. Now, I think that the Mumbai attacks stress the fact that Lashkar-e-Taiba, or the radical Islamic groups in Kashmir, generally, the jihadi groups, and Lashkar-e-Taiba is one of them, which is the most prominent and the leading one. Although they have a local agenda in Kashmir and afterwards in India, but still they are very much globalized. And the globalization is coming within the interaction and the linkage between Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Middle East, and the Middle East with Lashkar-e-Taiba. And to put Lashkar-e-Taiba only as a local organization that has only a local agenda, it would be a mistake. And the creation or the flourishing of Lashkar-e-Taiba would not have been able unless they were supported by basically, I would say, two major elements. First of all, the ideology of global jihad. Second is funding and support from external sources. I'm speaking about the radical jihadi manifestation of Lashkar-e-Taiba. Of course, there is an additional factor, which is the territorial presence, which enables them to conduct their activities, training camps, and so forth. But first of all, what is Lashkar-e-Taiba and why it is relevant to the Middle East? And how the Middle East is in their focus, although I'm sure that maybe 90% of the ordinary audience around the world didn't even hear about Lashkar-e-Taiba before the Mumbai attacks. It is known in the general research community, intelligence community, that Lashkar-e-Taiba collects funds and donations from the Pakistani community in the Persian Gulf, in the United Kingdom, other Islamic NGOs, and I will elaborate later, and Pakistani other Kashmiri business people. Lashkar maintains a website under the name of Jamaat-e-Dawa. This is exactly the organization that was in the focus of 2 days ago military attack by the Pakistani army. This website is solicitates for funds and provides information about the group activity. Lashkar-e-Taiba maintains ties to religious and militant groups around the world. It is globalized. It is not confined to its own local, selfish agenda. The range of activities is very much from the Philippines, or the south part of the Philippines, Middle East, Chechnya, and so forth. Even according to Saudi reports, open sources, it is known and it is very much proven that one of the main supporters of the Lashkar-e-Taiba reshaping, especially after the Afghan war in '89, the beginning of the 90s and onward, Saudi Arabia had contributed very much to the shape of how Lashkar-e-Taiba looks like, how he thinks like, what is his motivation, its motivation, ideology, and funding. According to the Saudi newspapers themselves, already back in '95, it was published that the Saudis were calling for jihad and supporting all Muslim struggle around the world. This article quotes muftis, imam, academics that are supporting jihad inside Saudi Arabia, from Saudi Arabia, supporting jihad around the world. The article stresses Kashmir as a place which jihad is taking place and so forth, and that's why donations should be made for Muslims that are living there. Straightforward. The article quotes the importance of the contribution of jihad and is described as being a level above the jihad himself. Allah blessed the warriors of financial jihad beyond those of jihad with the soul, meaning not only to support jihad by the ideology and by being identified with jihad, but practically practicing the jihad and endorsing the participation in jihad. Another Saudi policy publication was that the Saudi policy regarding the jihad arena in Kashmir was reflected in '99. And now, I'll tell you why I'm a little bit pointing out the history in a moment. In '99, in August, the Saudi newspaper Al Jazeera reported on a press conference conducted by WAMI. WAMI is the no, World Assembly of Muslim Youth. This is a Saudi-based charity which is supervised by the government, and by the way, all charities, or what are called charities, are being conducted, supervised, not as NGOs that we know in the West, by the Saudi government and Saudi officials, princes, and so forth. So the report was that Al Jazeera reported about that conference that the Secretary General, Manal Johani, praised the role played by the Saudi Arabia by providing assistance to the Muslims all around the world, especially in Kashmir. Johani equated the Kashmir issue with the situation in Kosovo, Palestine, and called the Muslims to help the Kashmiri people around the world and assist their suffering. So the perception that the Saudi radical Islam, Wahhabi, Salafi sees the world of confrontation between zones of jihad where there are Muslim minorities that are struggling politically and also religiously against another force. It can be the Israelis, it can be the Serbs, it can be the Indians or whatever, or the Philippines, not connected to a specific religious, but they are defending as the spearhead. Saudi Arabia presents itself as the protector and the spearhead of defending the Muslims around the world vis-a-vis conspiracies, vis-a-vis what Ben Baz, the late Sheikh Ben Baz, was defining it as the Western cultural attack. And this is the real, in addition, or the basic, before real politics. This is the ideology. And for this, the Saudis are very much committed in recruiting and funneling ideology to those minorities and funding. The tool to implement this policy, the charities. In 2000, in September, the Saudi newspaper Al Jazeera reported that an additional press conference made by WAMI Secretary General. During the press conference, Johani presented the Saudi Arabia's role in providing aid for the Kashmiri issue and asked the Islamic countries to play an effective part in the saving of the Kashmir's Muslims. Johani also spoke about the subject of the Kashmiri people's jihad and noted that they sacrificed in their ongoing jihad thousands of casualties. He added, quote, "The Kashmiri people today want to protect their Islamic entity and faith and their country, and we must help them." End of quote. Now, the input of the Saudi Arabia, I stress it for several reasons. First of all, I have nothing personal against Saudi Arabia. I'm presenting as a researcher and a scholar facts. Saudi Arabia still is being held unaccountable and still poses a kind of politically correctness posture that nobody is even daring in the international community to point a finger to an evolving phenomenon since the end of the war in Afghanistan, 89, especially at the beginning of the 90s, and the Saudi contribution of mushrooming and entrenching those phenomena of global jihad around the world, whether it is Chechnya, the Philippines, Kosovo, and so forth. In addition, also the Palestinian territories. And nobody dares to say or to confront the Saudis for reasons that I'm sure that you can understand why. And I think it is not understandable. They have to be accountable for this. Now, Lashkar-e-Taiba, within its development, created an infrastructure inside Pakistan within their training camps, which became very relevant not only in the struggle or within the boundaries of Kashmir, India. Lashkar-e-Taiba created a capability, an operational capability, by structuring training camps, highly skilled trainers, instructors, veterans from the Afghan war in their training camps. Through those training camps, some of well-known terrorists passed through before launching their attack. The training period was in Lashkar-e-Taiba training camp. One of the well-known one is David Hicks, the British one. I will elaborate later. The well-known shoe bomber, the shoe bomber Richard Reed, was training in Lashkar-e-Taiba training camp. Darian Barrett, the same. He was the mastermind of the failed gas cylinder bombing plot in London, who prepared detailed blueprints for Al-Qaeda of the buildings in New York financial district, according to the information that does exist. Mr. Barrett, a British subject and a Hindu who converted to Islam, trained with Lashkar-e-Taiba and then became an instructor at the Mujahideen camp in Afghanistan and joined Al-Qaeda. High-ranking Al-Qaeda operative Abu Zubaydah, if you heard his name, also connected to Lashkar-e-Taiba when he was arrested in 2002 in a Lashkar safe house in Faisalabad in Pakistan. But they are not the only ones, and these are just a symbolic demonstration of Westerns that passed through training period in Lashkar-e-Taiba training camp and then were dispatched when they are highly trained to their missions. Now, Lashkar-e-Taiba is headed by a guy that is called Muhammad Saeed. He is the leader, he plays a key role in Lashkar-e-Taiba operational activities, ideology, but also in the international worldwide activity. He oversaw the management of terrorist training camps in Pakistan in 2006. Now we are coming much close to the current event. So you see there is a continuity in the developing events. It's an evolving story, and it's not a random development or random, occasionally a manifestation of a marginal wave. We're speaking about a structure which is locally and globally. Saeed is very much involved in the international arena, including funding the camps, including preparing Mujahideen and militants to fight against the coalition forces in Afghanistan, and later on we'll see it also in Iran. Now it's coming closer to the Middle East. In 2005, Saeed determined where the graduates of the Lashkar camps in Pakistan should be sent to fight, and personally organized the infiltration of Lashkar militants into Iraq during the Iraqi war, while he was on a trip in Saudi Arabia, present there, with the knowledge of the Saudi government. At least that he does operate or does make any activities inside Saudi Arabia. To Saudi Arabia you need permission to come. And also he arranged for Lashkar operatives to be sent to Europe as Lashkar European fundraising coordinator. So Europe is also under stress in a moment. What is the role of... so Saudi Arabia again was a launching pad regarding sending mujahideen, well-trained, highly skilled mujahideen to the war in Iraq. And the war in Iraq was not against Israel, was against, I think, the Americans or who were there, or still out there. So up until now you see the global nature of Lashkar-e-Taiba. Not just locally and very, very provincial organization. It has a global outreach. Another prominent figure that I think should be introduced is Mr. Haji Muhammad Ashraf. Mr. Ashraf is Lashkar chief financier, and he is holding this position since 2003. He traveled around the world, also in the Middle East, throughout 2003 and 2004, and he was personally collecting donations on behalf of Lashkar. Ashraf assisted Saudi Arabia-based Lashkar leadership in 2003 with expanding its organization and increasing its fundraising activities. It is known that Lashkar had some operational activity guided by the Supreme Command from outside, inside Saudi Arabia. Another gentleman, Mahmoud Muhammad Ahmad Bahzik, he is a Saudi national. Now, he was in contact regarding financing Lashkar-e-Taiba. He was in contact with donors throughout the 80s and the 90s. He served as the Lashkar leader in Saudi Arabia during that period, 80s and 90s, before Ashraf. He coordinated the fundraising activity with non-governmental organizations and in Saudi Arabia and businessmen. Now, non-governmental is an underestimation. Basically, what the meaning is the charities. The charities, my opinion is, after researching this topic of the Saudi charities for more than 5 years, with a very good assistance at the beginning from Dory Gold, it is now evident that those non-governmental, as we call, as they are being nicknamed in the West, they are governmental. They are very much monitored by the Saudi government. So money is coming to the Lashkar. I think at least knowingly, maybe not intentionally, but maybe both, knowingly and intentionally from the Saudi government, or the Saudi regime at least is aware about the activities of Lashkar in Saudi Arabia and globally around the world. Just as an episode, 2 days ago, Zaki Rahman Lahvi, it was reported that he was arrested in this raid of the Pakistani raid on Lashkar-e-Taiba training camp, and he was detained. And he is allegedly the mastermind, or one of the masterminds, and he held a constant cellular contact with the attackers in Mumbai. Now, this guy was very much, of course, his position is chief of operation of Lashkar, and he was very much involved in military operation, including Chechnya, Bosnia, and again Iraq. Then, as a mercenary, he also traveled to Bosnia. He was in Afghanistan, he was in Kashmir, then he went into Bosnia, assisting the Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda oriented brigades in Bosnia, and so forth. So he was a well-known inspiration, basically operationally, but also ideology, because basically he was very much influenced by the Wahhabi Salafi dogma ideology of global jihad. And by his analyzing his activities along the years, show exactly the nomadic nature of the global jihad from arena to arena. And whereas global jihad shifted from places to places, you see also Barbaros moving on the same directions, including South Philippines. Why Barbaros? Because like Sheikh Mahmoud Abu Ter, if you know him from East Jerusalem, that has red beard, that he paints it, and this is the virtues of the Prophet, a tradition to paint your beard into a reddish kind of color. He was very pious, and this was his trademark. That's why everybody called him Barbaros. He was a Saudi. During the 80s and the 90s, Barbaros played a critical role in the shaping of Lashkar-e-Taiba, helping to run its military training camps, serving as a critical link between the organization and the wealthy and pious Saudi financiers and organizations in Saudi Arabia and Pakistani and Muslim fanatics around the world. Barbaros was interviewed in '94, and he said, now he is a Saudi, remember, and he said, jihad in Kashmir is still going on. It is healthy, alhamdulillah. Our Kashmiri brothers have achieved a lot. Some of our Mujahideen brothers, whether Arabs or non-Arabs, such as the Pakistanis, and our brothers in Southeast Asia have also helped. This is his declaration to Asirat al-Mustaqim in '94. Another contribution from the Saudi arena is Mr. Wael Jaledan, which still is very enjoying his freedom in Saudi Arabia, protected by the Saudi government. He headed the Saudi Red Crescent and other charitable organizations which are specifically indicted and designated as organizations that are connected in funding terrorism. And Jaledan is one of the financiers of bin Laden. His name is well known in the US, around the world, and still he's unaccountable. Like the television series, The Untouchables. Raises a big question about this issue. Now we come closer to our arena, whereas Lashkar-e-Taiba is very much using Abdullah Azam teachings and writing about the jihad, the farda'ain, the personal duty, the near enemy and the far enemy. We are not going now to speak about Abdullah Azam ideology, but Lashkar-e-Taiba very much endorsed his ideology. Just to remind you that Abdullah Azam is a Palestinian, was a Palestinian, from the northern part of the West Bank, in Jenin, Silat al-Khartiya. And to tell you frankly, when I was the governor of Jenin during '91, '93, I didn't even know that this client was within my constituency. But very much, his family, very much, mosques named on his name were prevalent at that region, but not only there. Anyhow, Abdullah Azam is an inspiration, was an inspiration, and still is. Even today you find his teachings around the world, even in the West, including Saudi-financed mosques and Islamic centers in the West. Anyhow, Abdullah Azam is taught in Lashkar-e-Taiba camps, and in 2002 it was identified that Jamaat al-Dawah is the parent organization, or I would say the overt facet of Lashkar-e-Taiba, and I'll speak about it in a minute. But anyhow, the website of Jamaat al-Dawah in 2002 was directly linked to the website of Hamas, the official Palestine Info, or Palestine.com, or whatever. We all know it by heart, and there was a direct link. It is known also that Sheikh Yassin, before he was killed by Israel, Sheikh Yassin routinely delivered speeches addressed to Lashkar-e-Taiba militants' rallies when it happened, not in Gaza, in Kashmir, in Pakistan. Taking into consideration, and this is just in brackets, the Islamic solidarity, or the radical Islamic solidarity. The global jihad is not only local, or act local, think global, this is Al-Qaeda, but also the general mindset of solidarity. Me, as a Hamas leader in Palestine, I very much care about what is happening with other Muslim minorities around the world. And other Muslim minorities around the world should care very much what is happening in Gaza, or in the West Bank, not necessarily directly connected to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Because if they were even under different rule, the Brits or the Americans, and you see what is happening in Iraq, this is not an Israeli occupation. This is a crusade occupation. This is a foreign occupation. Nevertheless, and within the context of, I'm just tying the concept, within the Global Jihad Declaration of bin Laden in 98, in Al-Quds al-Arabi, he said about the front, the Islamic front against the Crusaders and the Jews. So everything is linked, and I'm trying to connect the dots, because once again it's very easy to focus only what happened in Mumbai, and that's it, and not give a more wider perspective. Anyhow, Sheikh Yassin addressed speeches in Lashkar-e-Taiba rallies. There are a lot of reports regarding the linkage between Saudi charitable organizations. Why only Saudis? Because they have the money. That's it. So I avoid the question. They have the money, they have the ideology, they have the money, they have the international linkage, they regard themselves as the spearhead of Islam. They needed to do it externally, internationally, because to preserve their internal political situation and instability. So they export everything outside, and this changed a little bit after the attacks in 2003. But basically, the Saudi mindset, which laid the foundations since the beginning of the 90s until recently, these are the foundations, that its fruits, these were the sowing seeds that today we are facing. So the Saudi methodology, traditionally, since then, since the war in Afghanistan, 79, but nevertheless, regarding the subcontinent or Kashmir, their very intensive connection was through one ideology, as I mentioned, the teachings of Abdullah Azzam. Abdullah Azzam came to this global jihad notion not in Palestine. He came to this global jihad notion in Saudi Arabia by interacting with Saudi well-known scholars, headed by the late Sheikh, or the late Mufti of Saudi Arabia, Sheikh bin Baz, and others, and basically creating a new mixture, or a cocktail, or a blend, very flammable one, which was the ingredients of the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood and the ideology of Wahhabism. together a new blend and flavor which was exported and then spread after the Afghan war around the world, including Kashmir. The contribution of Barbaros, the contribution of others came after the ideology and after assisting the Islamic minorities, deprived and oppressed minorities around the world, including Kashmir. Now, to do it, the methodology always was to take advantage of the humanitarian crisis, to put a step in the door. Legitimate. Who is against assisting widows and orphans and so forth, and education and clinics? Now, I'm speaking about this because now we will come also to Hamas. You see a methodology, a way of action that you can duplicate it all around the world, whether it is in the Philippines, Chechnya, Kosovo, Palestine, and so forth. The same methodology, the same patterns. Now, direct assistance to armed groups is a problematic one for Saudi Arabia. That's why the use of charities, what is called by mistake in the West charities. No, we're speaking about highly trained organizations which are using the social network and abusing the social network, what we call the dawah, the propagation, through mosques, through clinics, madrasas, memorization of Quran centers, and so forth. A very widespread net that can influence the mindset and recruit as much as possible supporters ideologically, first of all, Muslims around the world to the Wahhabi style ideology and commitment. Now, to do this, you need a lot of money. That's why I said that Jamaat al-Dawa, as a mother organization, basically it's a front organization. Exactly like the Hamas used in the same methodology the Zakat committees in the West Bank and Gaza, as a front. Who can oppose not only politically correctness, really, who can oppose assisting the poor? We have in Judaism tzedakah, you have in Christianity, and in Islam, zakah. Taking the advantage of this structure, that some of the money was funneled to support terrorism, whether it is families of suicide bombers, as in the Palestinian case, or, as we saw in Lashkar-e-Taiba, financing their activities. So the same pattern, the same model, the same paradigm. You can see it in the Philippines, you can see it in Kosovo, you see it all around those places which are active confrontations between Islam or radical Islam and the other world, whether they are Christians, Hindus, or whatever. The notion of global Islam is also penetrated to the surroundings of Gaza and in some extent in the West Bank, but mainly in Gaza. The same phenomenon. The fact that after 2005 we witness mushrooming of radical Islamic global jihad-oriented organizations, which still are confined, they are not big, but still they are very vocal, is the same trend, which is not confined only to jihadic places, as I mentioned, in other places around the world. It is also very much implemented in Gaza. And especially in light of the the mushrooming of those global jihad organizations in Iraq, in the Iraq war. From 2005, the same phenomenon exists under the umbrella of Hamas entity. 2005 is the unilateral pullout of Israel from Gaza. Effectively, from 2006, Fatah is less capable of conducting things. The elections in the PA, Hamas coming into power, and finally in 2007 the takeover, the brutal takeover in the way of a coup of Gaza. Under the umbrella of radical Islamic organization, which is Hamas, there is a revival of global jihadi organizations, whether it is Jaish al-Islam, which is the most well-known, headed by Mumtaz Durmush, and others. Bet al-Maqdis, there are all kinds of radical Islam organizations, which basically, up until now, their effective attacks against Israel were marginal. They took responsibility of Qassam rockets firing on the Yad Mordechai kibbutz near the northern part of the Gaza Strip, on Kisufim border crossing, but not really very effective attacks. But what is important of this phenomenon is the radicalization of already radicalized society in Gaza, willingly or unwillingly, and the radical government. Now, the possibility of such groups to be active is first of all because Gaza, on one hand, is highly governed by Hamas, but only in several parts of Gaza Strip or the very heavily populated areas, but in other parts it's practically an ungoverned zone. And we know that in ungoverned zones or safe havens, radical Islamic organizations are flourishing. Look what is happening in Somalia and other parts of the world. Now, the emergence of these groups are worrying because they are very much inspired by the very same ideologies that I've spoken in the last hour. Global jihad, Salafi Wahhabi, strict interpretation of Islam, which is being interpreted into political and terrorist activity. Because on beliefs, still we don't pay taxes. Not yet. We can believe whatever we want, or even express maybe our opinion here and there. But they are very much committed to an agenda. On one hand, and this is a tricky situation, on one hand, they are not Hamas, but on the other hand, they can pose a threat to Hamas for a variety of reasons. Now, to make it more complex, Hamas is not Al-Qaeda, but it can be, for a variety of reasons. Anyhow, at the end of the day, to make it simple, and this is my slogan in life, keep it simple. At the end of the day, the simple situation, which is a very frustrating one, that we are seeing the same pattern of global jihad-oriented groups starting to be active in Gaza. Now, I admit I don't know exactly how and what are the ways of their fundings. I don't know. Of course they are being funded by someone. What are the links and the chains of funding? For me, it's not totally clear. They are using the internet. They have websites, very nice and invested websites. They are carrying some attacks here and there. Most of the attacks, by the way, by those groups were on foreign Western establishments in Gaza, on YMCA, on the American school, less on directed assaults on Israeli targets. They were marginal. But this phenomenon is very much duplicating other zones, as I mentioned before. And it is not secret that the Saudis were also... Saudis were very much involved, openly, with no shame, supporting Hamas charities, while saying this is not terrorism, this is freedom fighting. But in Kashmir, it's better for us not to talk. Or in the Philippines, it's better for us not to talk. And so forth. So there is, in their perspective, good terrorism and bad terrorism. Bad terrorism is everything that is connected, confronting the US. This is a problematic issue to endorse groups that at the end of the day, they are part of the excess of evil under the Bush doctrine. But I'm sure it will be also in the future, even if it will not be nicknamed like this. But the Palestinians, it's a different case. And openly declaring their assistance to families of suicide bombers, to Hamas infrastructures, the same pattern as we saw Jamaat al-Dawa in Pakistan, the same. As a charitable front organization, we see the same, the Mujamma al-Islami, or the Islamic Society in Gaza, or the Zakat Committee in Jenin, or whatever. The same pattern, there's no difference. And I think for this also the Saudis have to be accountable. Because at the end of the day, to sum up, Lashkar-e-Taiba is a manifestation that I think that we are facing today, the results of a long period of investment that was made in the name of pure Islam, headed by the Saudis, sowing the seeds that the fruits we get today. Until Mumbai, nobody cared. So some bombs were planted in some stations in Mumbai or in New Delhi. Poor Indians, they will survive. I'm speaking cynically. It's not such a big deal, so they kill some Indians. They have a lot. Nobody cared. The Mumbai attack put on the agenda, hey guys, we are speaking about something different. It's not just a local dispute. We're speaking about an organization that has a global agenda, which is reflecting instability in the region and beyond the region. Very much the fruits, the sour fruits that we are harvesting today, as we harvested, unfortunately, confronting the Palestinians, now the world is witnessing what is happening in Mumbai. The same characteristics, the same developments, the same mindset, the same threats, and unfortunately very similar results. What I wish to emphasize, and with this I will sum up, I think that today, metaphorically, I think the international community have to stop moving around the bush. Bush is no longer there, or will not be longer there, and we have to stop moving around the bush. We have to confront the phenomenon as it is, even if it's inconvenient politically to some elements in the international community, oil and so forth, political, and what are the end results, Iran and so forth. I'm not ignoring other aspects, but I think, to be fair, to be honest, also to the Indian people, we have to put it in the perspective that this attack reflects a global jihad phenomenon, although it was acted or perpetrated by a local organization. Thank you.
We have time for just a few questions.
Regarding Iran, I didn't mention Iran, although it's a major player, but in this regard of the Sunnite radical Islam, they are not relevant. They are relevant in other arenas regarding the Shiite radical Islam. And this is not the case with Lashkar-e-Taiba, the model that I presented. Having said that, of course, Iran is a major contributor in spreading of the Shiite radical Islam, there's no doubt about it. And by the way, in the same methodology also through charitable organizations, El-Imdad in Lebanon and others, which are well known. So the methodology of recruiting and abusing the dawah and the charitable activity to penetrate and to take over the hearts and the minds of the population is implemented by the Iranians themselves. But I ignored the Iranian angle because they are not directly connected to Kashmir and to the global jihad phenomenon represented by Al-Qaeda, Bin Laden, which is a Sunni Wahhabi manifestation and development. Needless to say, and you know from the briefings that I'm sure that you see, that Iran is very much involved in their way in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Hamas, the axis that is very much developed, the notion of mukawama, the struggle that has to be maintained all the time. And this is another axis which we as Israel are confronting, which puts a very great challenge to our doorstep. But of course this is a different or additional angle. Regarding Goa, tell you frankly, I don't know. Me as Israeli, I prefer that the youngsters will go somewhere else. Politically uncorrectness, because they get there exposed to a lot of problems. Of course, I would say that people have to travel. And if there is an alert or a threat, they should avoid traveling. As we Israelis avoid traveling to Sinai if there is an alert, so we Israelis have to avoid traveling to Goa or to other places when we have a concrete or general alert. We have to be obedient to the alerts and react or behave responsibly. This is not connected to the problem that we are facing with Israeli youngsters exposed to drugs in Goa, but this is not an Indian problem. And I don't blame the Indians, I blame the Israelis. But this is not in my jurisdiction. Regarding hitting Israelis or killing Israelis, always it's good, it's an added value. Even if you don't intend in your preparation stage to hit Israelis and you go to a target which is inhabited by Western in general, because this is the pattern of the global jihad, attacking Western interests and so forth, objects of high value and very prestigious, especially the media and so forth. Of course, that if Israelis are being hit, it's another value, it gives another element of success. No doubt in my mind, when I read the reports and so forth, and now it's been established, that the Chabad house in Mumbai was intentionally picked as a target. And once again, it demonstrates the global jihad ideology. You see the Taj Mahal, you see the Obori, you see the Chabad, and now you go back to the ideology and you say, okay, the jihad against the Crusaders and the Jews. Does it fit to the model? It fits. In addition, economic jihad. Okay, what are the economic jihad? Pipelines, oil, this, all the ideology of economic jihad. You can read in our website, in ICT, you will see my analysis on the economic jihad. Again, Western targets, hotels, and so forth. So if you go and analyze and you wish to see the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda, go to Jewish targets, whether it was in, not connected to Israel at first, in Jerba, go to Casablanca, go to Turkey, Jewish targets, not Israeli targets. High Western stylish, go to Marriott hotels, go to other well-known brands, and this is attacking the brands, and so forth. So even within this perspective, you see that this is a global jihad, the ideology, the nature of picking the targets. Still, I'm puzzled why those guys, 10, did not commit each and every one of them a suicide attack, which might have been much more devastated, and why they bothered the hostage barricade situation, which was a very problematic situation. Although they maybe have known that they will not get out of it, but still it's not what we call suicide attack by pressing a button, and the success of the attack is by the very explosion of the perpetrator himself, and this was not the case.
Yes, sir.
So do that from Romanian news agency.
Would you speak into the microphone, please, so we have it for the transcript? Time for just a couple of questions, and then we're running a little bit late.
You referred to Islamic charities and you said who dare to harm the interests of the poor. However, if I'm not wrong, President Bush during his first term in power initiated some policies and requested his Western allies to take steps, and steps were taken in such countries as Britain and Germany and France against bank accounts held. Now, has this policy progressed so far at this official level in Western countries in confiscating and impounding bank accounts and closing down other charities and fighting charities of this level?
Yes. I think the policy is constant and is continuing, designating, confiscating, freezing accounts, and so forth. But this is based on information and about individuals. I'm speaking about Al-Qaeda. I'm not speaking now about the Revolutionary Guard, the designation of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and the businesses and so forth. But what is was a little bit hesitant is that the U.S., for a variety of reasons, designated or banned only partially the Saudi charities. The Saudis were very glad because they understood that they are now in a corner. They were very willingly to sacrifice Al-Haramain. And on Al-Haramain they went all out. It was banned, it was dismantled, and so forth. But the other charities were not. So you have the closure of IRO, the International Islamic Relief Organization, let's say in the Philippines, because they were connected directly to Jamal Khalifa and his activity in Southeast Asia. But in general, the IRO still is operating. WAMI is still operating, including in Gaza. WAMI and the IRO, with officers and so forth. So this is a kind of hesitating tango between the international community that understands the gravity and the problem with those charities and the Saudis. How to deal with the Saudis. Those charities change names, and you find them also active in other parts of the world, conflict zones, jihadic zones, and still being active. And unfortunately, nothing concrete is being done. It was not an all-out campaign to demolish, to dismantle all those charities. It was very, choosy, with a lot of caution, and that's why the general perception of the Saudis in this regard, they can get out of it. It's not a problem. We'll make what we need to make. We'll make a nice counter-terrorism conference in Mecca, in Jeddah, if I remember correctly, with a lot of pyrotechnic after 2003, and that's it. They didn't do anymore, and I was quoted by the agencies, and maybe I was harsh, but I think this is the situation. This is a double-faced policy by the Saudis, whether you are on this side or on that side. They are trying to hold the stick in the middle. As we say in Arabic, hamil al-asai bin nus, holding the stick in the middle. And sometimes we are paying a price.
Yoni, we're going to have just a couple more questions. I'm just going to throw in a quick one that
Sure.
maybe is some interest to perhaps some diplomats and some media folks here. There's a very, very active debate right now in Europe and the United States that Hamas can be dealt with diplomatically. That perhaps the clock can be turned back on Hamas to encourage a reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas, to create some sort of diplomatic agenda between those two as sort of a unified Palestinian front for diplomatic advancement. Now, of course, the Brookings Institute, the Saban Center, came out with a very far-reaching report this past week that was noted even by the president and meant for the president-elect that Hamas should be dealt with directly. Now, the question is, in light of everything you've said today, is Gaza a lost case, or is there a possibility of re-energizing or recalibrating some way Hamas in order to encourage it the way the Egyptians have tried to, but have failed, to make them some sort of a diplomatic partner?
I think that, from my perspective, without any political agenda, as a researcher, trying to be honest, fair, and unbiased, although I'm an Israeli, I think the situation in Gaza is irreversible. Irreversible. I read Hamas materials in Arabic. I see their publication, their statement, and so forth, and this is no way back, ever. Only ahead, not back. And the next stage, hopefully, is the West Bank, if they will be strong enough. Hopefully, I mean from their perspective. Now, any reconciliation government, Palestinian government, and so forth, yes, of course, they would like it very much, but under their terms. And the terms are very harsh to be digested by Fatah. Now, I think it would be too superficial, too optimistic, and too naive to think that today, in light of Hamas' position, someone can turn the clock back and to bring Hamas into a kind of pragmatic, which they declare, pragmatic hudna, that let's start talking, but we are not talking about those issues. But otherwise, we are ready to talk with Israel, no problem. We are not talking about recognition of Israel. We are not talking about cessation of terrorists or mukawama, the struggle. But otherwise, let's go into a hudna for 50 years. And this is upon their declarations. Now, if Hamas, you cannot mix oranges and cucumbers. We have to decide what we are dealing with. If Hamas is ready to pragmatize, I think that it will not be longer called Hamas. It will be something else. And the frustrated factions within Hamas then will infiltrate or find resort in the radical global jihadi local organization in Gaza. And this is what they are very much hoping for. That those organizations will be a refuge to the Hamas radical or mainstream radical Islam that believe that any normalization or pragmatization will be harmful for Hamas cause, and they will lead the organization towards a more radical entity or more radical organization. And by the way, this is not just a hypothesis. We see it by the declaration of Zahar. We saw declarations of Siam hinting that if Hamas will lose its real identity, people may shift their loyalty, their activity to the genuine Islamic organization, the real ones, not the Hutna style and pragmatized, as we call it in Arabic, the intihazi. Intihazi is opportunistics. We are not opportunistics. We are carrying the flag of Islam, and if Hamas will pragmatize, we will shift to Jaish al-Islam or whatever. So I think the situation in Gaza is irreversible, and now the battle, and I call it the battle, is on the West Bank. Talking with Hamas, I just will ask, are you ready, if the international community is ready to sit down with Al-Qaeda, we are ready, I'm ready, to talk and speak with Hamas, okay? There's no difference. And this is totally a misrepresentation that Hamas is like the IRA, because we in the West think like Western models. You have the IRA, you have the political wing, and you have the operational wing, and they are not connected, and let's speak with the pragmatists. It doesn't exist in Hamas, as in general, in radical Islamic organization, generally it doesn't exist. Because the structure is combined. The policy, the religious, is combined. It's one head. They have two hands, so what? Are you willing to deal with Yoni as an entity, yes or no? Don't deal with my right arm or with my left arm, because it doesn't represent the whole body of Yoni. And this is exactly unnatural division that Hamas was shaping, and unfortunately many people in the West fall into this trap. And I say, if the US is ready to give Al-Qaeda the right to conduct elections, free democratic elections to Al-Qaeda, and negotiate with them, so let's do it. We saw what happened in Gaza and in the West Bank in light of the American pressure on the Israeli government to conduct free democratic elections, and what was the outcome. And now we are very much confronting this bad situation. So I think, to sum up with a long answer, a very short question is that I'm not a question of optimistic or pessimistic. I think it's unrealistic to conduct such a path, and I think that at the end of the day it will be a big disappointment to those who believe that this is the right way to conduct business, especially here in the Middle East.
Thank you, Yoni. I'm going to publicly stop it there, and thank you, as we're running 25 minutes late. For those of you who would like to ask Yoni, you probably can come up. We'll give him a round of applause for a wonderful presentation.